This is an aluminum model of one DU tank round. This round would be fired by an Abrams tank. If it was actually uranium rather than aluminum, it would be over 10 pounds of solid uranium. What happens, it moves extremely high velocity. The minute it leaves the bore of the gun, it catches fire. So this rod is a burning rod of uranium. It impacts tremendous forces, unbelievable forces, over this very small diameter. And it's like a blowtorch with tremendous forces that punches right through. Now, as this breaks through and goes into anything, it can be steel, concrete, sandbag bunkers, wood, or anything. Uranium itself is soft. So you have parts of the fragments of uranium breaks off as it enters and goes through. The uranium rod emits alpha, beta, and gamma radiation and X-ray radiation. The alpha particle is a 4.15 MeV particle. That's 4.15 million electron volts. Now, the intercellular voltage, the voltage that your cell operates biologically, is 10 electron volts. So when that cell is bombarded by an alpha particle at 4.5 million electron volts, it doesn't have a good day. We have all kinds of other problems. We have the beta particle and the gamma rays, the X-rays. Now, we've actually measured the ionizing radiation emissions from a DU rod within, say, 4 to 6 inches at over 300 millirems per hour. Now, that radiation is continuous. So you get a fragment of DU into your body that's emitting at over 300 millirems per hour. Or if you're holding the rod in your hand, it's over 300 millirems per hour. And if you got the fragment, then you got the alpha particle in there, which is an extremely hot particle, 4.15 MeV. And we're looking at what we measured over 10,000 counts per minute, 10,000 disintegrations per minute, 10,000 alpha particles per minute. In fact, in May of 2002, the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs reported that over 160,000 troops that participated in Gulf War I, the period August of 1990 through the fall of 1991, basically October and November 1991, have been classified as disabled from anywhere from 10 to 100%. Now, my own disability didn't come about until after May of 2002. The count right now is somewhere close to 200,000. When we look at all the troops that have gone into the Persian Gulf region between August of 1990 and May of 2002, when the last formal report was written, the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs formally acknowledges over 221,000 individuals are labeled as permanently disabled, and over 10,000 are deceased that had service connection disabilities. There's a big difference. There's a 60,000 increase in individuals that are disabled amongst those that served after the fall of 1991. That disability is only due to residual exposures and immunizations that were continued to be given because there was no active combat. There was no active maneuvering. So what's happened? Well, what happened prior to Gulf War I is pre-deployment health physical assessments were not given. And at the completion of Gulf War I, post-deployment health physical assessments were not given, even though we specifically requested it. In my own case, when I came back to get released after completing special projects, I said I was exposed to these. We need to do these tests. And they refused to do them.
I've been a staff scientist at 2 nuclear weapons laboratories, 5 years at the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, where the Manhattan Project started, and 2 years at the Lawrence Livermore Lab.
Lorraine Murray is an independent scientist who specializes in radiation issues. Her degrees include BS in geology, master's degree in Near Eastern Studies, and has pursued doctoral studies in geosciences at the University of California, Davis.
For the past 5 years, my research is focused on the damaging effects of low-level radiation. The history of depleted uranium goes back to a 1943 declassified memo known as the Groves Memorandum. In this memo, depleted uranium is recommended for development as a poison gas warfare weapon. According to the United Nations Human Rights Commission, which has declared depleted uranium illegal, approximately 17 countries have purchased depleted uranium weaponry from the United States government.
In December of 1992, the director of the United States Army Environmental Policy Institute was ordered to figure out ways to reduce the toxicity of uranium munitions by Assistant Secretary of the Army Walker. In 1995, the director of AEPI told the Secretary of the Army, "We can't reduce the toxicity. It's not possible." The United States Army Common Task Training states very specifically, uranium contamination will make food and water unusable. And yet we use it in combat all over the place. That's why the United Nations Subcommission on Human Rights had ruled that uranium munitions were an illegal weapon, because they're indiscriminate. They can't be cleaned up, and they last for eternity.
The amount of depleted uranium used in the first Gulf War in 1991 is approximately 340 tons, and this was admitted by the U.S. government. In Yugoslavia, Lord Robertson, who was the head of NATO in 1998, admitted in the public media that the United States had used depleted uranium warheads in every missile used in that invasion. It's estimated that at least 1,000 tons of depleted uranium was used in Afghanistan in 2001, and approximately 2,400 tons were used in Iraq in 2003.
The United Nations Subcommission on Human Rights, because of the fact that uranium contamination makes food and water unusable, has a permanent effect and can't be cleaned up, and affects not only combatants but non-combatants. It's been ruled an illegal weapon. It was years ago. That's common sense.
We all know that the United States falsely accused Iraq of possessing weapons of mass destruction in 2003. In fact, the United States invaded Iraq and used weapons of mass destruction against the Iraqis. Depleted uranium has a half-life of 4.5 billion years. If we had a pound of depleted uranium now, in 4.5 billion years, there would only be half a pound left. This means that the Middle East and Central Asia and Yugoslavia are contaminated forever.
We're 1st Platoon Charlie Company, and we were part of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
On the battlefield, you gotta have an officer who can think on his feet. We had that.
Lieutenant Walker came to us from ROTC.
It didn't matter if we were in training or in combat. He was right there with us.
He had confidence and dedication.
And wherever he goes, we go.
I'm a military brat. My father spent 24 years in the Army.
Staff Sergeant Bob Jones is a veteran of Desert Storm, a former Army Ranger now retired and disabled due to Gulf War illness. Not only is Bob ill, but his entire immediate family is affected as they all suffer from mycoplasma fermentans incognitus.
During the air campaign, we targeted their chemical, biological, and nuclear facilities. And so we were exposed to chemicals, biologicals, nuclear radiation in the form of depleted uranium, and also direct enriched uranium, or EU, from those nuclear facilities that were bombed and targeted. And many of the coalition, especially guys on the front line, such as my unit and others like us, were in the area of exposure from the fallouts of the coalition bombings. And although this information became widely known as early as 1994, through testimony and release of GAO reports that showed that the meteorological data supported the fact that the downwind plume or fallout from the bombings drifted over a large number of the troops